kind of like just how signs of like how quickly this is playing out versus slower scenarios. There are key analysts that I follow that are specialists in the oil market. So I kind of watch their temperature on any given day. What are they freaking out about or not freaking out about? Or have they kind of revised any of their guidance? But yeah, a lot of it today, of course, is about the Strait, about downstream effects from the Strait, as well as liquidity specifically, because that's where ultimately this starts ricocheting back into other things.
Israel and Iran beat each other to death. That actually helps United States strategic interests in a number of areas because both of them become threats to dollar reserve status in different ways. I don't know how I feel about that, but again, I have it on very good account from a very credible source that might be the case. So that's another school of thought I've seen that actually makes some sense, because up the last 10, 12 years, Trump has been, love him or hate him, he's had very good political instincts.
I think a large part was that they underestimated things like the net international investment position, the difficulty of reshoring supply chains, the network effects of manufacturing hubs. So they thought that, by hitting hard with these tariffs, the dollar would go up, and that they would then be in a very strong negotiating position to get all these new deals. It didn't work out like that. And then because the tariffs were put in using emergency powers for non-emergency purposes, a conservative-leaning court struck down a conservative president's tariffs. It's also just complicated because, in general, fiscal conservatives are not in favor of tax increases, and that was effectively a tax increase that was at least partially on Americans.
Look, I think that's now the best case. I think a Suez moment for the U.S. is now best case. Because we can look and see what are the outs here. The outs here, the most likely outs are we declare victory and go home. In which case, the Iranians will have dealt a strategic defeat to the United States of America. Everyone in the world will understand that, except for the sort of, Iran jihadis and certain elements of MAGA.
Lyn Alden emphasizes that we are living in a headline-driven market, where events can turn nonlinear very quickly. That means investors are not simply watching valuation models or traditional recession indicators. They are also watching geopolitical developments, military escalation, shipping routes, energy disruptions, and liquidity stress in real time. In that kind of environment, the news cycle itself becomes a market input. That is why Lyn says she is monitoring several layers at once. First, she is watching the headlines around the Strait of Hormuz and any major escalation in the region. Second, she is tracking energy flows, especially whether disruption is emerging in ways that could affect oil supply. Third, she is focusing on market plumbing, liquidity conditions, funding stress, and cracks in the financial system. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.
Well, so we are unfortunately in a very headline-driven market. So there are periods of time where like things tend to lead into the next thing, like monitoring a liquidity situation. In the past, now we're in a very headline-driven market, so things can just become nonlinear very quickly. So one is, unfortunately, I have to monitor the news first and foremost. And then aside from that, I am monitoring. What's happening in the Strait. Is any energy, are certain deals being made to get at least some energy out? Is it going in the right direction, or is it not going in the right direction? I look for things like what are countries doing about mitigants, and then because my focus is on markets and finance, as a profession, I'm focusing significantly on liquidity. I'm looking at things like, are cracks forming or not yet in liquidity situations. I watch things like Japanese Treasury yields. I look at things like, are any Fed kind of liquidity facilities being used, and if so, how much? What are kind of funding spreads for short-term, institutional lending, securitized lending? I look at those kind of move index. Of course, are there kind of days we have stocks down, bond yields up, and dollar flat to down, and that's kind of emerging market behavior. Do you see days like that in Japan? So kind of like just signs of like how quickly this is playing out versus slower scenarios. There are key analysts that I follow that are specialists in the oil market. So I kind of watch their temperature on any given day. What are they freaking out about or not freaking out about? Or have they kind of revised any of their guidance? But yeah, a lot of it today, of course, is about the Strait, about downstream effects from the Strait, as well as liquidity specifically, because that's where ultimately this starts ricocheting back into other things.
There's a school of thought. There's multiple schools of thought on this. There is the school of thought of what I would call Iran jihadis, right? They're the jihadis against Iran, right? And so, hey, Iran's going to get a nuke, and anything else like, hey, we might crash the economy. It's worth it. Hey, we might, it's worth it. Hey, we might starve 1 billion people in emerging markets. Hey, it's worth it. That's one school of thought. There's another school of thought that that this is sort of 5D chess, and that ultimately either 5D, and you kind of get the same way. It's either 5D chess that we can really squeeze China's oil supplies and thereby increase our leverage vis-a-vis rare earths, which they've been holding over us since well, certainly since Liberation Day. And there's maybe something to that, or trying to strategically break China's ability to buy oil outside the dollar, maybe something to that. There's sort of a different version of the same thing, which is sort of bombing in that we're bombing inside the wire. There's a lot to suggest that maybe we're losing to AI, losing an AI to China, or very close to it, and certainly losing in other areas. And maybe somebody made a decision that, hey, it's sort of like, we were soldiers once and young. Once they were inside the wire, you call broken arrow, you call the airstrike inside your own wire, and so you kill some of your own people, but you kill everybody, and you hope some of your guys live. And there's an element that I think says that that's the case. And that's essentially just saying, hey, we're going to lose this round, right? So when you were a kid, we're going to lose this Monopoly game, and I'm angry. So before I come back around and have to pay you another $2,000 in rent on your hotels on Boardwalk, I'm going to flip the board, punch you in the face, and go outside and play kickball or something. And in that world, like, look, we do that. The rest of the world's going to starve first. That's how it's going to work. And quite frankly, American cities are going to starve right alongside the world. Like, you're not going to want to be an American. People are like, well, we're better off. And this is, like this net part I was talking about earlier. Like, yeah, on a gross base, America will be fine. You're not going to want to be in New York City if this goes as bad. If we're starving Asia, if we're starving, 1 billion people across the global South, you're not going to want to be in cities in America. Not at all. And then there's two other thoughts. There is a school of thought that, I have to phrase this delicately. This one is as I have from a very credible source. There is a school of thought that it is in the United States' strategic interests to let Iran and Israel beat each other to death in a controlled fight. And if Israel and Iran beat each other to death, that actually helps United States strategic interests in a number of areas, because both of them become threats to dollar reserve status in different ways. I don't know how I feel about that, but again, I have it on very good account from a very credible source that might be the case. So that's another school of thought I've seen that actually makes some sense, because up for the last 10, 12 years, Trump has been, love him or hate him, he's had very good political instincts. And this on the surface seems just stupid. So that would actually make some sense. And then the final that is, for me, still the Occam's razor explanation, and therefore my base case is, he kicked a beehive, and they thought it would be easy after Venezuela, and now the beehive is stuck on his foot, and he doesn't know what to do. And so he's getting angrier and angrier because he didn't listen to his intelligence, and there wasn't a plan for what would happen after on the decapitation strike, and that is still my base case. But I'm open to sort of all these other things, and conveniently, the longer Hormuz stays closed, the less any of these really matter as terms of the why. all that starts to matter is the what. But they all at some point converge on, holy cow, the system is collapsing if we take Hormuz closed long enough. But those are sort of, the different whys we're there that I have circulating around in my head, that as I watch headlines and stories and markets all sort of play this out.
I side with the Occam's razor as by far my highest probability case, which is that they thought this would be easy. They kicked a beehive, and now they're scrambling. I think that there are always that segment of neocons that pretty much always want to deal with the Iran issue. They found the guy that would do it. I think they were on a high after the efficiency of Venezuela operation. I think Trump thought he could basically decapitate any kind of secondary or tertiary country at whim. And I mean, Venezuela is a corrupt socialist state. If you take out the top guy, you can just negotiate with the second person who just wants to buy luxury stuff and keep their job. Whereas in Iran, you're dealing with a lot more hardcore ideologues that you can kill layers deep, and they're still going to troll you on Twitter and refuse to open the strait. And I don't and they've got very good engineers, as we've seen from these drone attacks, and they've also planned for us trying to target their operations and disable their capabilities. And they built clearly a lot of resiliencies in this, despite other criticisms I would quickly lay at Iran. I'm certainly no fan of their regime, but in this area, I think the administration underestimated them. And you can have, it's like you can go downstream as you want. I mean, like, so this administration's not really been strategic, to say the least. I mean, I was on the record ahead before Doge. I was like, Doge is not going to work. It's not structurally. They're focusing on the wrong point here. Doge is not going to work. It was a blip in the radar. And then the tariff operation, like you do emergency powers to put in tariffs. You claim the rest of the world's paying for 100% of them. It's just on the surface not accurate. I do think that they were correct to focus on the trade deficit for a change, which administrations have not been doing. But then the actual mechanism to do that is messy. If you look at Stephen Myron's paper, which was kind of like the Steelman version of what the administration wanted to do, they published a paper back in November 2024 when he was becoming kind of Trump's like chief economic advisor. They kind of said, if you were to restructure trade, here's how you would do it, and it outlines mechanisms and risks. I generally disagreed with the paper at the time, but there was parts of it that were logical, and you could I had a more pessimistic snare on the outcomes, but I think a large part was that they underestimated things like the net international investment position, the difficulty of reshoring supply chains, the network effects of manufacturing hubs. So they thought that by hitting hard with these tariffs, the dollar would go up, and that they would then be in a very strong negotiating position to get all these new deals. It didn't work out like that. And then because the tariffs were put in using emergency powers for non-emergency purposes, a conservative-leaning court struck down a conservative president's tariffs. It's also just complicated because, in general, fiscal conservatives are not in favor of tax increases, and that was effectively a tax increase that was at least partially on Americans. So that was like an unsound, it was like a short-term focused strategy that's just kind of built on paper, rather than, say, if you wanted to implement tariffs through Congress that are more persistent, you could, but you didn't build the coalition to do that, partially because and then, then it's like, then the whole Epstein fiasco, right? And then just Epstein, gradually declining poll numbers. Wars historically are kind of effective for distracting. I think Trump, obviously, he takes things personally. So, he didn't like Venezuela and their response, and then that operation happened, and the special forces clearly did a very efficient job with that. It was kind of shocking how just clean that ended up being. I think then he was probably riding a high from that and said, well, why not cement my legacy by, ending this 50-year kind of issue with Iran? And it's not the same. And so, maybe there are scenarios where they could have nailed it, but it's structurally different. It's geographically different. It's ideologically different. And I think we were replaying why we can't just kind of play God with the rest of the world and assume that we can just keep doing things and just after a time that they never light on fire, they never come back to hit us. So I think we're scrambling. And of course, there are parts of, there are advisors that are trying to play 4D chess. There are, in any sort of king's court, there's multiple competing factions, and you'll have dumb ones and smart ones and, all manner around. But I think the actual outcome, the decision-making process here, I think it's the Occam's razor. I think it is the mess that it seems to be. Yeah, I mean, the White House still has up on their website, last I checked, from June of last year, Iran's nuclear capability has been destroyed. Anything else that claims otherwise is fake news. That's sitting on the White House website while we had to go in here ostensibly for nukes. I think it is actually as cartoonish as it looks. Like, I think we live in a simulation and we're in like the crazy version.
One of the most important ideas in the discussion is Luke Gromen's argument that Iran does not need to defeat the U.S. military. It only needs to stress the U.S. Treasury market. That is a profound statement. Why? Because modern imperial power is not just military power. It is financial credibility. It is reserve currency status. It is the ability to issue debt at scale and have the world continue demanding your currency. If a regional conflict causes a meaningful shock to treasury markets, oil pricing, global payment routes, or reserve confidence, then the real strategic loss may be financial rather than tactical.
I think you have to define what is end of hegemony or end of dollar hegemony. I think dollar usage will still be 80, 85%, whatever, 90% payment, because, any Chuck E. Cheese token will do when you're looking to get to the prize window, right? It doesn't matter. Look, when I wrote the first, the bomb started flying February 28th, March 3rd, I wrote that Iran doesn't have to beat the U.S. military, they just have to beat the U.S. Treasury market. And in that report, I said, look, this has the potential, if it goes the way I think it's going to go, to become a U.S. Suez moment, where, for like the UK, it was sort of when it became apparent to everybody that sort of the hegemonic period for the UK was over. And look, I think that's now the best case. I think a Suez moment for the U.S. is now best case. Because we can look and see what are the outs here. The outs here, the most likely outs are we declare victory and go home. In which case, the Iranians will have dealt a strategic defeat to the United States of America. Everyone in the world will understand that, except for the sort of, Iran jihadis and certain elements of MAGA. Option 2 is we keep going. And look, one of the dogs that is not barking this week, everyone's like, oh, great rescue. And it was a great rescue. And they're very brave. Why did it have to happen? Our president told us on Wednesday night that their military was destroyed, their army destroyed, navy destroyed, decimated, crushed like never before, blah, blah, blah. And yet, next day they shot down an F-15. And then the next day during the rescue, they shot down 2 C-130s and 4 helicopters. Like, so that just gives us a little taste of what putting ground troops on the ground is going to do. I've been a new Gallipoli. Luke watched the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, knife fight in a phone booth, whatever metaphor you want to use, that's going to happen. And that is going to be, look, we got into Vietnam. That was the end of the dollar. That was the end of Bretton Woods. So it strains credulity to think it won't be, that won't be that outcome. And then I guess the last option is, really one of two options. Number one, like the Iranians get a say, right? Even if we say declare victory and walk away, they keep shooting. And if I'm them, I'm going to keep shooting. Absolutely, I'm going to. That's an indictment. And the last one is, look, we do something extreme, like we go in and we nuke them. And like every day this goes on, that it is not going, tactically it's going fine for us, but strategically, when you run out of interceptor missiles, what do we think Israel is going to do when they completely run out of interceptors? Which, oh, by the way, they probably need Chinese rare earths to maintain supplies of. What do we think they're going to do? I don't know. Would they do the Samson option? Maybe. Then what? So there's these, and Yeah, I guess the last thing is the Iranians are they're telling you they'll let oil move for yuan. And people say, well, there's no, yuan is it's a closed capital account, blah blah blah. They're missing what the Iranians are doing. That's gold for oil. How do you get yuan? It's simple. You sell dollars, you buy gold, you take the gold to China, you sell the gold to China for yuan, you take the yuan to Iran, you buy the oil, you put it on a boat, you sail it out of there, and away you go. And so that option is absolutely the end of the post $71 system. That is whether we're allowing it to happen, or as some assert, or whether we can't do anything about it, like sink the Chinese boats moving the stuff, doesn't matter. You've got a yuan oil system parallel running alongside the dollar oil system, and that is de facto the end of the dollar's post 71 status. So my best case, the happy outcome at this point is we walk away, we let them keep control of the Strait of Hormuz, they continue to transact in yuan through gold. Gold goes to the moon, the dollar falls sharply. That facilitates a reindustrialization of the US, high inflation, probably yield curve control, capital controls in the United States. That's the good outcome at this point. They all get uglier from that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple. I think Luke described it well. I think there are multiple layers. Over time, technology changes, and so what was once dominant, like the carrier group, when you have things like hypersonic missiles or very effective one-way drones that cost $40,000, it's just the math changes to some extent. So it's just that you could have competent people running things, and that still could just chip away at things. That, of course, we're 50 years into the Triffin dilemma. So the U.S. has deindustrialized itself to maintain its global reserve status. It's kind of it's a natural just flywheel that gets into effect. It's not even always a decision. It's just the network effect of the dollar system. And so our ability to replenish things is lower. Our manufacturing hub is weak compared to China's and elsewhere. So those are just kind of like all just serious realities that were happening, which then increase the odds we run into a strategic defeat like here, which then has downstream implications for the currency for other things. I've argued before that, like most empires, when they could just see that, okay, we've overexpanded, we're doing great, but there's a lot of risks ahead, we can just right size our borders to make sure we're defending the right spots, and we're going to focus on inward flourishing. They rarely do that. They try to maintain every border they have. They use all their blood and treasure to try to maintain what they have, because that's what the emperor wants to do. And so far we're on that path. Instead of kind of retreating from a position of strength gracefully, leaving other people's problems for other people, we've decided to do more boondoggles. But I do think that the dollar system, short of extreme scenarios, has a very long life to it, because a lot of this goes down to just the math of it, which is there's like tens of trillions of dollar-denominated debt in the world. All of that represents inflexible demand for dollars. It's mostly not even owed to the U.S. It's owed to other cross-border entities. That can be chipped away at over time. You can do defaults on it, but then you get very nonlinear financial outcomes, both in the U.S. and globally. There's a very complex game theory with that. You don't want to be the first one to default, or even the first 5 to default, usually, unless you're the biggest to default first. Or like restructure is the polite term. And so I do think that I would separate the risk of a military kind of strategic defeat from the dollar system itself, at least in any sort of like near-term timelines, even though one, of course, can lead to the other over time. And I do think that regardless of this particular scenario playing out, I think we were already headed toward a more multipolar world in terms of what sovereigns store their reserves in. And then to some extent, even what they denominate payment in, so that they can't be like sanctioned or censored unilaterally. So I think we're already seeing just a natural shift there. And then I'd argue it's even in the US's interest to let that happen. That would have been an example of letting things happen kind of gracefully and kind of focusing on inward stuff rather than trying to maintain that unnecessarily. But this, I think, is an accelerant. There are moments in time where, like the UK losing its reserve status was a process. that, there's World War One, then there's World War Two, then there's the Suez moment, and then there's there's the rise first of kind of the in the early stages of that, the German economic power, then the rise of the American economic power. So there was this like gradual handover. And I think this is one particular moment. I think the Iraq War is already an early moment. That was kind of let's call it World War One for like, losing status. It's like that's the first shot. And then, you have a global financial crisis, then you have COVID, then you have like lockdowns and things like that. And then you have, and the stimulus, and then you have, this rising conflict between the US and China. And then you have this particular moment. I think these are all kind of like flags along the way toward a more multipolar world. And all of that can be true without the idiocracy component. But then you mentioned idiocracy. I mean, I do think that it's an oddly prescient movie because that was like a pro wrestler president. We have a reality star president. We were in a situation where we're like facing election between a senile guy and a reality star. And like when the senile guy had to drop out, we had a person who couldn't win her own primary if she had to. So we skipped that. It's just the way the timing worked out. And so we find ourselves in like the silliest timeline. And then we had, like Doge, Epstein, Iran boondoggle. We're in kind of, we are. That idiocracy component is kind of happening alongside of what otherwise could have been these similar things, just slightly smarter.
Both Alden and Gromen also acknowledge something more human. The political environment itself is chaotic, almost absurd. They refer to the combination of war headlines, political theater, misjudgments, social media noise, and policy improvisation as something that feels like an idiocracy timeline. That matters because the quality of decision-making at the top influences how crises unfold. If strategy is poor, communication is poor, and institutions are overconfident, then even a manageable conflict can become much more dangerous. So while the tone may be sardonic at times, the underlying message is not trivial. The system is being tested by a very real confluence of poor incentives, strategic overreach, energy leverage, and monetary fragility. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.